All right, so get this. We're going deep on USAID and
USC.
yeah, USAID.
Okay.
And it's a wild one from what I'm seeing. I mean, you guys sent over a whole mix of stuff. We
Yeah.
got news clips, political commentary, even some like financial analysis.
Hmm.
It's a lot, and USAI is clearly making some serious waves.
It is.
So our mission today is to help you navigate this current, cut through all the noise and figure out what's really going on.
Yeah.
Because
Definitely.
this is not your average charity. We're talking whispers of billion-dollar mysteries, a gas station in the desert that costs more than my house, and Elon Musk dropping some serious truth bombs.
Yeah, it seems like USAID attracting attention from all sides.
Right.
And that usually means there's a fascinating story to uncover.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics. USAI, the U.S. Agency for International Development,
Hmm.
founded way back in 1961 during the Cold War.
Right.
And its original mission was basically to help other countries, especially those at risk of falling under Soviet influence.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The Cold War's over, right?
It is.
And yet USAID is still going strong with a budget bigger than some small countries.
Wow.
About $50 billion a year.
Yeah. That's a lot of helping.
That's a lot of helping.
So it makes you wonder, is it still about humanitarian aid or has it become something else entirely?
Well, that's the core question, isn't it? I mean, we've moved from a bipolar world to a much more complex global landscape.
Right.
So it stands to reason that an organization like USA might need to adapt to these new challenges and priorities.
Adapt. Yeah. And some people are saying that adaptation hasn't exactly been smooth sailing.
Uh-oh.
We've got Senator Ron Johnson claiming that recent reports of mismanagement are just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, wow.
He's not pulling any punches.
He's certainly raising some serious concerns.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting that he's not alone in his skepticism.
Right.
There's a growing chorus of voices from both sides of the aisle questioning USAID's effectiveness and accountability. Yeah, and he's got receipts, allegations of $1 billion going missing in Afghanistan, potentially ending up in the wrong hands.
Oh.
Then there's that story of the $43 million gas station built in Afghanistan that just sits abandoned.
Wow.
I mean, I get sticker shock filling up my tank,
Yeah.
but that's next level.
That's a whole other level.
And on top of all of that, there are whispers that over $1 billion of USAID's budget is basically unaccounted for.
The lack of transparency is troubling. You
Yeah.
know, if we're talking about taxpayer dollars being used effectively,
Right.
the public has a right to know where their money is going and what it's achieving.
Absolutely.
It's this kind of opacity
Yeah.
that breeds mistrust and suspicion.
It makes sense. And it's not just about wasted money, right?
Yeah.
Some are saying that USA has been dabbling in things way beyond bandages and food drops.
Oh, really?
We're talking about claims of funding programs, pushing specific social agendas in other countries, and even supporting media outlets with a certain political slant.
This raises the question of whether USAI is overstepping its mandate.
Right.
Is it operating as a neutral provider of humanitarian aid?
Yeah.
Or has it become an instrument of American soft power?
Okay, hold on. Back up a sec. Soft power. For those of us who don't speak fluent diplomat, what exactly does that mean?
Good point. Soft power in simple terms is the ability to influence others through attraction and persuasion rather than coercion.
Okay.
Think of it as winning hearts and minds.
Okay.
Not through military might,
Right.
but through cultural influence, diplomacy, and yes, sometimes aid.
Okay.
Some argue that USAID's activities, particularly those related to promoting specific social or political agendas, fall under this umbrella of soft power.
So it's about shaping perceptions, building relationships, maybe even subtly pushing certain values or viewpoints.
Yeah.
That adds a whole other layer to this whole USAID puzzle.
It certainly does, and it gets even more complicated when you consider the allegations that USA may have indirectly funded something called gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab.
Wait, gain of function. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It might sound like science fiction,
Yeah.
but it's a very real and very controversial area of research. In essence, it involves manipulating viruses to make them more transmissible or deadly,
Oh, wow.
often for the purpose of understanding how they could potentially cause pandemic.
Hold up. So they're basically making viruses even more dangerous. I mean, I'm all for scientific progress,
Right.
but that seems a bit risky, doesn't it?
It's inherently risky, and that's why it sparks so much debate.
Right.
The concern is that these modified viruses could accidentally escape from the lab,
Oh, yeah.
triggering a global health crisis.
Right, because we've all seen how much chaos one little virus can cause.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if USAID did indeed fund this kind of research, even indirectly,
Mm-hmm.
it would raise some serious questions about their risk assessment and their oversight of these projects.
For sure, especially given all the questions swirling around the origins of COVID-19.
Exactly.
And speaking of controversy, things really blew up during the Trump administration.
Oh,
They went full-on attack mode against USAID, freezing funds, launching investigations, even shutting down their headquarters.
really?
Was it a genuine attempt to drain the swamp, or were there other motives at play?
The Trump administration definitely shook things up.
Yeah.
Their actions reflected a deep distrust of USAID,
Mm-hmm.
painting it as a bloated, inefficient bureaucracy riddled with waste and potentially even corruption.
Right.
They argued that it was a prime example of the deep state operating unchecked,
Yeah.
pursuing its own agenda rather than serving the interests of the American people.
They even brought in Elon Musk, the ultimate disruptor,
Oh,
to
wow.
head up the Department of Government Efficiency. And of course, Musk didn't hold back calling USA a criminal organization
Wow.
and advocating for its complete shutdown. Talk about a mic drop moment.
Musk's involvement with his characteristic bluntness brought a whole new level of scrutiny and public attention to USAID.
Yeah.
His accusations, while inflammatory,
Right.
resonated with those already skeptical of the agency and its sprawling operations.
And it wasn't just Republicans sounding the alarm. You had figures like Victor Davis Hanson, a respected historian and commentator, also calling for USAID's abolition.
Okay.
So this wasn't just a partisan attack.
It seems there was genuine bipartisan concern about USAID's effectiveness and accountability.
Okay.
Critics argued that the agency had become too large, too bureaucratic, and too unaccountable to the American people.
So we've got a lot of accusations flying around,
Oh.
waste, corruption, political bias, even potentially dangerous scientific research.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But before we dive into the arguments for and against USAID and whether it can be reformed or should be abolished altogether, I think it's important to step back and ask, what's at stake here? What are the potential consequences of getting this wrong?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about bureaucratic reshuffling or saving taxpayer dollars.
Right.
USAID's actions or inaction have real-world consequences for millions of people around the globe. The decisions we make about this agency could impact everything from global health and poverty to international stability and America's standing in the world.
Right. This isn't some abstract policy debate. It's about people's lives. It's about America's role in the world. It's about the values we stand for.
Exactly.
So let's dive into the heart of this debate,
Okay.
exploring the arguments for and against USAID's existence and see if we can figure out the best way forward.
Sounds good. It's a tangled web, that's
Ah.
for sure. So let's start with the folks calling for USAID to be shut down, abolished entirely. What's fueling that fire?
It seems like a radical move, scrapping a whole government agency. What are their main arguments?
Well, they argue that USAID is simply too far gone, too bloated, too inefficient, and frankly, too vulnerable to corruption.
Okay.
People like Elon Musk and Victor Davis Hanson,
Right.
they're saying it's become a symbol of bureaucratic waste, with little accountability for how those billions of dollars are actually spent.
So their view is cut the losses, shut it down, and start fresh.
Essentially, yes. They believe that trying to reform USAID is like trying to patch up a sinking ship.
Oh, wow.
They argue that those funds could be better used elsewhere, perhaps through private organizations or even channeled through different government agencies with a proven track record.
Okay. I can see their point if it's truly broken beyond repair.
Uh-huh.
But what about those arguing for reform? What's their vision for USAID's future?
Well, they acknowledge the problems, the waste, the lack of transparency,
Yeah.
but they believe USAID can be salvaged,
Okay.
that it still has the potential to be a powerful force for good in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Their argument is that with the right kind of leadership, oversight, and restructuring, USAID could be transformed into a truly effective and accountable agency.
So more of a scalpel than a sledgehammer approach.
Exactly.
Fix what's broken, streamline things, make it work better. But how exactly do they propose to do that?
Well, they advocate for a more focused and strategic approach.
Okay.
And their Marco Rubio, for instance, argues that USAID needs to be more closely aligned with American foreign policy goals. His point is that too often USAID's been operating in a silo, pursuing its own agenda,
Right.
sometimes even at odds with the State Department and other government agencies.
Makes sense. If you're going to spend that kind of money, it should be working in harmony with broader U.S. interests and strategies, right?
Exactly. Rubio and others argue that every dollar spent by USAID should be advancing clear and measurable goals that directly benefit both the recipient countries and the United States.
Okay.
They want to see a more results-oriented approach with rigorous evaluation and accountability mechanisms in place.
Okay, so we've got the abolishers and the reformers, two very different paths forward. But then there's Bill Gates,
Right.
and he's sounding the alarm warning about the potential consequences of cutting back USAID funding, especially in areas like global health.
Yeah, Bill Gates has been a vocal advocate for foreign aid,
Mm-hmm.
and he's particularly concerned about the impact on programs aimed at preventing disease, providing vaccines, and improving maternal and child health.
Okay.
He argues that USAID plays a vital role in funding these initiatives, particularly in developing countries where resources are scarce.
He's basically saying, hold on, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Even if there are problems with USAID, those programs are saving lives, and cutting them off could have devastating consequences.
That's his argument. He paints a pretty stark picture,
Yeah.
suggesting that millions of lives could be at stake if we abruptly pull back on aid.
Wow.
He believes that the potential harm caused by such a drastic move would far outweigh any potential savings or benefits.
So we've got a real moral dilemma here.
We do.
It's not just about budgets and bureaucracy. It's about weighing the potential costs and benefits, both financial and humanitarian.
Exactly. It forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
Is it morally acceptable to risk lives in order to punish an agency that's been accused of wrongdoing?
Right.
Can we as a nation turn our backs on those in need, even if it's in the name of fiscal responsibility or national interest?
Tough questions indeed. So let's break down these two options, abolition versus reformation. What are the potential pros and cons of each approach?
Okay, well, starting with abolition,
Yeah.
the main argument in its favor is the potential to eliminate waste and corruption.
Mm-hmm.
By shutting down USAID, you'd be cutting off the flow of money to those potentially misusing or mismanaging it.
So it's a clean break, a chance to start over with a clean slate.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And supporters argue that those funds could be redirected to other priorities, either domestically or perhaps through more efficient and accountable private aid organizations.
Okay, but what about the potential downsides? What are the risks of just pulling the plug on USAID?
Well, as Bill Gates highlighted, there's a real risk of causing significant harm.
Yeah.
Abruptly ending aid programs that people depend on could lead to increased poverty, disease, and instability in vulnerable regions.
And that instability could create ripple effects, leading to problems like mass migration conflict, even terrorism, which ultimately could end up costing us more in the long run.
Precisely. It's a complex equation. And it's not just about the immediate impact. There's also the potential damage to America's reputation and soft power. If we're seen as abandoning our commitment to helping others, it could weaken our alliances, erode our moral authority, and make it harder to achieve our foreign policy goals.
Okay, so abolition is a gamble with potentially high stakes. What about reformation? What are the arguments for trying to fix USAI?
Well, the main argument for reform is that it would allow us to retain the potential benefits of a large-scale government aid agency
Right.
while addressing the problems of waste, corruption, and lack of accountability.
Okay.
The idea is to streamline operations, increase transparency, and ensure that USAID's activities are aligned with both American interests and genuine humanitarian needs.
So it's about making USAID work smarter, not harder.
Exactly. Proponents of reform argue that with the right changes, USAID could become a powerful tool for promoting American values, advancing our foreign policy goals, and making a real difference in the lives of people around the world.
Sounds promising, but let's be realistic. Reforming a massive bureaucracy like USAID wouldn't be easy. What are the potential challenges and downsides?
Well, the biggest challenge is overcoming inertia. USAID has been around for decades,
Right.
and it's developed a deeply ingrained culture and way of doing things.
Yeah.
Changing that culture, instilling a new sense of accountability and efficiency would require strong leadership, political will, and probably a fair amount of time and resources.
So there's no guarantee that reform would be successful.
Right.
And even if it were, it would likely be a long and difficult process.
Absolutely. And there's also the risk that reform efforts could be hijacked by special interests or bogged down in bureaucratic infighting. It's a complex undertaking with no easy solutions.
So it seems like both abolition and reformation come with their own set of risks and rewards. What factors should we be considering when weighing these options?
Well, first and foremost, we need to be clear about our objectives.
Okay.
What are we trying to achieve with foreign aid?
Right.
Are we primarily focused on advancing our own national interests? Or are we genuinely committed to alleviating suffering and promoting development around the world?
That's a fundamental question, isn't it? Are we in it for ourselves, or are we truly trying to make a difference in the lives of others?
And it's not an either proposition.
Right.
It's possible to have both self-interest and altruism as motivating factors.
Okay.
But the balance between those two can shift depending on the circumstances.
Right. So clarifying our goals is crucial. What else should we be thinking about?
We need to be realistic about the potential costs and benefits of each approach.
Okay.
Abolition may seem like the cheaper option in the short term,
Yeah.
but it could have significant long-term costs if it leads to increased instability or weakens America's global standing.
Hmm.
Reform might be more expensive up front,
Right.
but it could ultimately yield greater returns if it results in a more effective and accountable aid agency.
So it's not just about the bottom line, it's about thinking strategically and considering the long-term implications of our choices.
Exactly.
Hmm.
We also need to be mindful of the political realities.
Okay.
Abolition would face significant opposition from those who believe in the mission of USI and those who benefit from its programs.
Right.
Reform would require bipartisan support and a willingness to compromise, which can be difficult to achieve in our current political climate.
It's a tangled web indeed. So many factors to consider, so many potential pitfalls. Is there any way to simplify this decision to find a clear path forward?
Unfortunately, there's no magic formula.
Yeah.
It's about weighing the evidence, considering the various perspectives, and ultimately making a judgment call based on what we believe will best serve both our national interests and our values as a nation.
I appreciate you laying out the complexities here. It's definitely not a black and white issue. But before we wrap up, I'm curious from your perspective, what's the most compelling argument for USAID's continued existence? What makes it worth saving, despite all its flaws?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think the most compelling argument for USAID is its potential to be a force multiplier for good. When done right, development assistance can not only alleviate suffering, but also create more stable, prosperous, and democratic societies.
Right.
And that, in turn, can benefit the United States by creating new markets for our goods, reducing the threat of terrorism and conflict, and promoting a more peaceful and just world.
So it's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, that helping others can ultimately benefit ourselves as well.
Exactly. It's about understanding that investing in development is not just charity.
Mhm.
It's a smart and strategic investment in our own future.
I like that framing. Investment, not just aid. It shifts the perspective in a really helpful way.
And it underscores the importance of doing it right. If
Mhm.
we're going to invest in development,
Yeah.
we need to make sure those investments are yielding real returns.
Yeah.
We need to demand accountability, transparency, and effectiveness from USI.
Right.
We need to ensure that it's operating in a way that truly benefits both the recipient countries and the United States.
So it's not about blindly supporting USAID or mindlessly cutting it off. It's about being engaged, informed, and demanding better.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the complexity of this issue and approaching it with a nuanced and critical eye.
Well said. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We'll explore some specific examples of USAID's successes and failures.
Okay.
And we'll delve into the thorny issue of how to measure the effectiveness of aid. Oh, so we're back. And man, this USAID deep dive, it's been a real eye-opener.
It has.
We've gone from like Cold War origins to billion-dollar questions, from abandoned gas stations to the complexities of soft power.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is a lot. And it brings us to this crucial question.
Yeah.
How do we actually measure whether this massive investment in aid is actually making a difference?
Right. I mean, it's one thing to talk about good intentions, but are we seeing tangible results?
Exactly. So how do we know it's working?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Measuring the effectiveness of aid is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as just looking at how much money is spent
Right.
or how many projects are completed. We need to consider the long-term impact, the unintended consequences, and the complex interplay of factors that contribute to development.
So it's not just about counting beans. It's about understanding the ripple effects, the systemic changes.
Exactly.
But how do you even begin to measure something like that?
It requires a multifaceted approach.
Okay.
We need to look at a range of indicators.
Like what?
Economic growth, poverty reduction,
Okay.
health outcomes, education levels, governance improvements,
Got it.
and we need to gather data over time
Yeah.
to track progress and identify trends.
Sounds like a lot of data crunching.
It is.
But even then, how do you isolate the impact of USAID specifically? I mean, there are so many other factors at play.
Right.
Government policies, global economic trends, even things like climate change.
You're absolutely right. It's incredibly difficult to disentangle the impact of aid from all the other variables.
Yeah.
That's why it's crucial to have rigorous evaluation methodologies in place.
Okay.
Control groups, randomized trials, sophisticated statistical analysis.
Right.
These are all tools that can help us get a clearer picture of what's working and what's not.
So it's about being as scientific as possible,
Yeah,
using data and evidence to guide our decisions.
exactly.
But I imagine there are also some qualitative aspects to consider.
Oh, absolutely.
The human stories, the individual experiences of those impacted by aid.
Absolutely. Numbers can tell us a lot,
Yeah.
but they can't capture the full picture.
Right.
We need to listen to the voices of those on the ground.
Yeah.
The communities and individuals. USAID is trying to help. Their perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
their stories,
Yeah.
are essential for understanding the true impact of aid and identifying areas for improvement.
It's about combining the quantitative with the qualitative,
Yes.
the data with the human experience.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's assume we've figured out how to measure effectiveness. What are some examples of USAID programs that have actually worked?
Okay.
Where have they made a real difference?
There are many examples of successful USAID initiatives.
Okay.
Take the PEPFAR program, for instance. It's been instrumental in fighting HIV/AIDS in Africa, providing life-saving antiretroviral treatment to millions of people.
Ah.
That's a clear example of aid making a tangible, measurable impact.
Wow. Millions of lives saved. That's a real testament to the power of well-targeted aid.
It is.
Are there other success stories?
Absolutely. USAID has also played a key role in eradicating smallpox,
Okay.
reducing child mortality rates,
Okay.
and promoting agricultural development in many parts of the world.
Okay.
And they've been active in disaster relief efforts,
Right.
providing critical assistance in the wake of earthquakes, hurricanes, and other natural disasters.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
USAID has a track record of success, particularly in areas like global health and humanitarian assistance.
Right.
But I'm guessing there have also been some missteps, some projects that haven't gone so well.
There's certainly been some high-profile failures. The abandoned gas station in Afghanistan is a prime example of a project that went awry.
Right.
It's a cautionary tale about the importance of proper planning oversight and understanding the local context.
Right. A $43 million gas station to nowhere. That's a pretty hard lesson to learn.
It is.
What are some of the factors that contribute to these kinds of failures?
Well, there are many potential pitfalls.
Okay.
Sometimes it's a lack of coordination with local governments or communities.
Mm,
Other times it's corruption or mismanagement.
right.
And sometimes it's simply a matter of good intentions gone wrong.
Yeah.
Projects that sound great on paper, but fail to take into account the complexities of the real world.
It seems like humility and adaptability are key. Recognizing that you don't have all the answers and being willing to adjust course when things aren't working.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the importance of accountability and evaluation.
Right.
We need to be constantly learning from both our successes and our failures,
Yeah.
using that knowledge to improve the effectiveness of aid and ensure that every dollar spent is making a real difference.
So it's not just about throwing money at problems, it's about being smart, strategic, and constantly striving to do better. Okay, so we've explored the complexities of measuring aid effectiveness. We've looked at examples of both success and failure.
Right.
But I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Okay.
The idea of USAID as a tool of American soft power.
Right.
How does that factor into the equation?
That's a crucial question. As we discussed, soft power is about influencing others through attraction and persuasion rather than coercion.
Mm-hmm.
It's about promoting our values and interests through diplomacy, cultural exchange, and yes, development assistance.
So it's about winning hearts and minds, not just building bridges and hospitals. But is that a legitimate role for USAID to play? Shouldn't humanitarian aid be neutral, focus solely on helping those in need, regardless of political consideration?
That's a valid point, and it's a debate that's been raging for decades.
Right.
Some argue that any attempt to use aid to promote a particular ideology or worldview is inherently manipulative
Yeah.
and undermines the legitimacy of humanitarian efforts.
Uh-huh.
Others contend that it's naive to think that aid can ever be truly neutral.
Right.
They argue that all aid by its very nature reflects the values and interests of the donor country.
So it's a balancing act. On the one hand, we want to be respectful of other cultures and avoid imposing our values on others.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we also want to promote democracy, human rights, and other values that we believe are essential for a just and prosperous world.
Exactly. And finding that balance is no easy feat.
Yeah.
It requires a deep understanding of the local context, sensitivity to cultural differences, and a willingness to engage in open and honest dialogue with recipient countries.
It's about building partnerships, not dictating terms. It's about empowering communities, not imposing solutions from the outside.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've explored the complexities of USAID, its successes and failures,
Right?
the challenges of measuring its effectiveness,
Yeah.
the thorny issue of soft power. It's a lot to digest.
It is.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways you hope our listener will walk away with?
I think the most important takeaway is that development assistance is a complex and multifaceted issue. There are no easy answers, no quick fixes.
Right.
It's about navigating a web of competing interests, weighing the costs and benefits, and making difficult choices in the face of uncertainty.
It's about recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach, that what works in one context may not work in another. And it's about being willing to constantly learn, adapt, and improve.
Exactly. We also need to be mindful of the power dynamics at play. USAID, with its vast resources and global reach, wields enormous influence. It's crucial that we use that influence responsibly, ethically, and in a way that truly benefits those we're trying to help.
So it's about being accountable, transparent, and always putting the needs of the people first.
Absolutely.
Okay, before we sign off, I want to leave our listener with a final thought, something to ponder. We've talked a lot about the role of government in development assistance. But what about the role of individuals? What can we as ordinary citizens do to make a difference in the fight against poverty, disease, and injustice?
That's a great question to leave our listener with.
Yeah.
There are many ways to get involved, even if you don't have millions of dollars to donate.
Right.
You can volunteer your time,
Yeah.
support organizations working on the ground, educate yourself about the issues, and advocate for policies that promote sustainable development.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play, that even small actions can have a ripple effect. We can be the change we want to see in the world.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
about being informed, engaged, and committed to creating a more just and equitable world for all.
Well said.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep making a difference.